Someone anonymous once said, "The only man who sticks closer to you in adversity than a friend is a creditor." Keep this in mind as we discuss today the impact of Evergrande on the financial market and what does it mean to you. My name is Dr. David Oualaalou.
And my name is Dr. Ross Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
We want to thank those of you who are viewing, and we want to thank those of you who have subscribed. We are inching closer to our goal of 70 million. We're a few short, of course.
About 69,900,039 subscribers. So we'll get there, Ross. We'll get there. But on a serious note, we want to thank our Patreon members for their continued support. And for you, if you like our videos, you can subscribe, but also consider joining our Patreon membership. Thank you so much for all your support.
As of yesterday, the S&P was down 1.7%. The Dow was down 600 points. Cryptocurrencies were hurt, and the financial markets were destabilized. Thanks to
Evergrande, way back in China.
Absolutely.
And that right there, Ross, and it's not a laughing matter. You know, sometimes, yes, we might appear laughing, but we are not laughing. It's not, it's a serious matter. It's the idea that how interconnected the global economy is. Here is an event in China end up impacting the stock market in New York.
And fast.
Quickly.
That lets you know how much the people in New York are watching the events that are going on in China, for them for this to be impacted so rapidly.
Yeah. Well, also because of the severe impacts that if this matter is not resolved, in other words, if the Chinese government doesn't get involved and figure out a way how to resolve this issue, it's going to spill out to other areas.
Absolutely, including unrest among the Chinese people. But maybe we should talk a little bit who Evergrande really is.
Certainly, certainly.
What we know is they are a huge property development organization. They do other things too, but they're among the biggest in China. And they have accrued a debt of over $300 billion that they cannot pay.
Yeah.
And so we look at 30% of China's gross domestic product is in real estate development. So if this collapses, this is a major hit on the economy.
Yeah. It will be a hit on the economy. It will also shake the confidence of investors in the Chinese market. And this is why, of course not in all sectors, but it will be a major impact on that confidence. But this is why the Chinese government, the President Xi's government, is going to now is in crossroad.
Oh yeah.
Do we bail out Evergrande, or do we let them fall and file for bankruptcy?
Well, there are any number of consequences to letting this thing fall.
Yeah.
For one thing, over 200,000 people will immediately lose their jobs.
Those are within the company.
That's within the company. Then we have all the contractors, the subcontractors out there, that might actually be as many as 1 million.
Actually, I did see in some stats, they were about millions would be losing their jobs.
And that's just the tip of a very ugly iceberg.
Exactly.
What we have is 1.5 million Chinese who have put their money into Evergrande as a deposit for a new home for themselves or a rental property. And they're on the brink of losing all of that. And those people are angry and scared.
And rightly so, because, I mean, when you think about all this, that with the society, with the Chinese government declaring that they have moved a large segment of society from poverty into the middle class. Well, one of the things you kind of categorize somebody in the middle class is ownership of property.
And what we see is people are so concerned about this that it's already turned violent, even at the headquarters of Evergrande.
Yeah, I mean, people in China is not gonna be happy about it. Then investors outside China is gonna now be thinking in terms of, okay, is it time to move that money out of the Chinese market?
Well,
You know.
what we see is some fund managers in the United States invested in Evergrande. And they're on the brink of a number of people on the brink of losing their 401k retirement plans
Ooh.
because the funds are in China.
Yeah.
Because Evergrande looked so prosperous for so long.
Well, and this is why some have compared this one to Lehman Brothers. Will Evergrande have the same faith as Lehman Brothers did back in '07 or '08?
You know, to understand what really went on here, it's not so different from any developer anywhere. The developer borrows money from some lending institution. They build, they sell, they pay back the debt. And it's a cycle as long as there's a demand for housing.
For housing, you're right.
And for many years now, there's been a very strong demand in China. Now the demand has weakened because housing has gotten so outrageously expensive that people can't afford it.
Exactly. And this is now where that question of, okay, how things going to move forward for the individuals who have put money into that, the investments, what does it going to do to the confidence in the financial market, and how the government is going to approach it. And this is one of the key questions a lot of observers in the financial markets are watching.
To add another car to that train of thought, the Chinese government is constantly looking at, are the people supporting the government? It's a very high value that the government has. And when you understand how people are willing to take to the streets and really rebel in China, it's understandable. They must hold the confidence of the people. We know that recently, before this happened, it was as high as 87% of the population said, we have great confidence in the central government. We like what the government's been doing.
Exactly. Well, except that now we are noticing, I've been reading some research papers about where the government is going, the Chinese government that is, and you are noticing now that President Xi started to focus his attention on domestic markets. It's looking inward. And I think personally, and this is my personal opinion, I think the idea of focusing on domestic matters is out of concern, because he is concerned about if he will lose control over public opinion domestically. And that is a concern for the establishment.
You know, according to one of the people we interviewed for another show, President Xi is one of the most popular leaders that has emerged in China. And for him to lose the confidence of the people because of some economic fiasco would be a real tragedy.
Exactly. And we're going to do a show about the Chinese government as to what lies ahead as far as the leadership. And we are gathering information just for you to know. We're going to be doing a show about that one once we gathered all the information we need about that aspect. So,
you know, Evergrande, was it just last year that they had an valuation of $320 billion?
Exactly. You are right, Ross. Last year, as of the end of 2020, their value market was about $320 billion.
And today?
Today, on September 2021, it dropped to about $4 billion. So that massive drop, it's really putting a big question marks on how the government now is going to do. Because the government, the Chinese government in Beijing, they have to decide what to do about this. Do they have to bail them out, or do they have to let them file for bankruptcy? And another thing, if I may add, because this Evergrande is obligated to pay today. As a matter of fact, they did pay one of their creditors as of today.
And they paid 2 yesterday. My question is, where'd the money come from?
Yeah, and I couldn't find based on what I read. So I can't speculate on that because I don't know. The thing is, the one thing that is factual is that there are some creditors that, according to the, based on what I read, is that Evergrande has to pay back its loan by 2025. And if they don't have the money available, that's why the value went down of the company on the market. But also that's what triggered now the Chinese government to start thinking how we're going to proceed with this.
You know, a complicating factor here is that Evergrande is a big one, but there are other big development companies also in the same kind of an economic bind.
Exactly. But this is where Chinese government in Beijing is going to now decide, do we want to make an example with this company to others? So, because you all remember, I'm sure you do remember, with the fall of the Lehman Brothers, and the argument was inside the government, oh, it's too big to fail, you're going to have, because the banks, and it's what took place behind closed doors at the Federal Reserve that most of us Americans do not know, how the decision was made to save Lehman Brothers. That decision was not made by the government. It was made in the Federal Reserve by Ben Bernanke at the time, by Paulson. I remember he was the Secretary of Treasury at the time, and all that. But the key question now, we all know what the outcome was on Lehman Brothers and the leading into the GFC, the global financial crisis that vibrated around the world. Could we be seeing the same outcome with Evergrande? And this is the question many analysts are asking as of today, if the Chinese government doesn't step in.
As you and I have talked previously, when Lehman Brothers went down, it so impacted the economy of Japan that it never recovered to this day. And that's more than a decade ago.
And yet you don't hear much about it,
You don't
Ross.
hear anything about
the
it unless you're
doesn't- in
in
Japan. You're right.
It's common conversation.
You're right. There is one aspect that I need to we need to let our viewer know about. It has to do with U.S. national debt. And you tie what's taking. This is again a perfect example for how interconnected the global economy is. And what's at stake here, at least for us in the United States, is that by the end of next week, the fiscal year for the United States government ends on September 30th. That's usually how it works for us in the United States as far as the fiscal year. And 1st of October is considered the new fiscal year for the next year. So the problem we have right now, just FYI, the problem is that there is now tensions inside Congress between the Democrats and Republicans regarding the national debt ceiling. Democrats wants to raise the national debt ceiling. Republicans are saying, hell no, we are not going to lift a finger on this. But here is the danger into all this, tit for tat. They better come up to some sort of an agreement. If we default on our obligations, because we have bills that we have to pay, if we default on this, and this can keep going, first of all, you're going to see a shutdown of the government next week, or the following week. And second, you're going to start seeing prices,
Oh, you
up.
mean inflation is going to hit us even harder than it already is?
Exactly.
And by the way, where does the U.S. borrow the money from?
That's a good point. That would be China. And as of yesterday, we have hit about $28 trillion in national debt. So it becomes a question, and just to see how this is all linked up, here is the U.S. with national debt and all that issue, but here is also the Evergrande in China dealing with its own problems. And it becomes a concern for Chinese government that, are we losing confidence in investors if this issue is not resolved? That is where the big concern. Usually, if the government in China, in Beijing, decided to assist Evergrande in bailing them out, which if they do that, they're gonna do it behind closed doors.
Right.
Chinese government is not going to come forward and say, hey, we bailed out the you ain't going to hear that. It's going to be done behind closed doors. What's going to be happening is that now it will be the Chinese government dictating the rules to a private entity like that, because they're going to have to take over assets, okay? They're going to have to restructure everything else. Or, as we said earlier, will Chinese government let them, hey, you need to, we're going to let you file for bankruptcy and let you be served as an example to other companies. That's where I see it going, Russ. But as to the example of Lehman Brothers, I don't see that, because in Lehman Brothers' case, Lehman Brothers has some stock products involved in all this. This Evergrande, it's a different scenario altogether. That's why I don't see that happening. The question will become is whether the government will step in behind closed doors to ensure that its economy does not get shaken bad. Because remember, just for you to know, guys, is that the recent stats indicate that the growth of the Chinese economy has slowed.
And what they don't need is an economic fiasco,
Exactly.
like bankruptcy of the what is it? The biggest property development company has more debt than any other property development company in the history of the world.
Yeah, but it is also one of the biggest real estate developers in China. So
Yeah, over what is it, 280 cities and
yeah,
this
it's
goes
very
on and
big.
on. It's huge.
It's very big. It's very big. I think part of the problem where they end up in, or the reason for why they end up in the problem, beside whatever else, is it has to do with the amount of debt they accumulate, far beyond what they are, because they were worth in the market only about 320. And when you amass that kind of debt in $300 billion,
Yeah.
and you only worth 320, it would be a different story if the company was worth about $1 trillion.
Yeah.
That will be a different story. But when you have that closeness between the amount of debt you accumulate and what's your value in the market, that becomes a little bit shaky. So,
The Chinese government saw this, but not in a timely way. They come up with some rules and regulations that they put in place, but way too late to save the day.
exactly. Well, it's because, and this is what I believe, and again, this is my personal opinion, why President Xi now is going to have to turn his attention domestically, because he will be very concerned about losing control over the population. And we all know where that's going to lead to. Because with this fiasco with the Evergrande, if people start losing their homes, losing their pensions and all that, we all know it's a recipe for disaster in the making. That's basically what it's going to be.
President Xi has been one of the most popular presidents of China ever. Maybe Mao might have been in his day.
In his day, yeah.
But currently, he is enormously popular. And this could bring him down.
Yeah, well, as we said earlier, I think we did mention that we're going to be doing a video on that a specific topic about the leadership in China and how President Xi is going to be moving forward, because there are a lot of tensions inside the Communist Party.
Surprising.
Yeah, make no mistake about it. Chinese system is not this perfect. Of course, each system has its own shortcomings, like every other system in the world. But at least in the case of China, moving forward, there are internally some issues. So we are waiting to confirm some information before we do that.
It appears that the Chinese economy, the American economy, and maybe the rest of the world too.
Yeah.
But these two countries are really lockstep in moving into a future. And as opposed to creating an adversarial position, it might be time to
Cooperate. And it makes perfect sense.
and
right?
sit down and really talk about and resolve current issues rather than go into another Cold War or whatever's coming.
Yeah. Well, that's true, because it will benefit all of us.
It'd benefit all
this
of
is
us.
not just for the Chinese market. This is not for just the U.S. market. It's for everybody. Can you imagine if China and the United States sit down rather than say, hey, I'm going to put more tariffs on you. I'm going to reciprocate by adding more tariffs on your products. Instead, sitting down and figure out a way where we can cooperate, and it will benefit both populations, and not just the Chinese or the Americans. It'll benefit the whole world.
Absolutely right.
And that will be truly a meaningful way of truly living in peace, if we may use the term, rather than these tensions, tit for tat and on. Because it's going to have, one day that stuff's going to hit the wall, and it's going to just go out of control. And
Would you say that's really the message for this show?
I think so, Ross, because what this shows, this issue in Evergrande, it shows not only how interconnected the economy is, the global economy that is. Here is something that happened in China, vibrated in New York Stock Exchange, it trickled down into real estate market around the world, but also in investments, crypto, and all the financial market as a whole. Then you add to it, okay, what's going to happen to my pension if I happen to be investing into that?
Right.
You know, what's going to happen to my real estate if I am to get a loan as far as through the company and now it went bankrupt and all that. So people's going to be thinking in terms of, wow, this is not about just the Chinese market over there. This has to do with us here as well. And
All of a sudden, it becomes very personal if your 401k plan was invested in Evergrande. Very personal.
well, can you imagine, Ross, the outcome of someone working the last 30 years and time for him or her to retire? All of a sudden, he or she is informed, sorry, we've lost your money because the company went bankrupt.
So I think the bottom line here is it's time for the United States and China to really sit down and talk things through, as opposed to an adversarial stance. It's time to change.
I couldn't agree more, Ross. I couldn't agree more.
We'd like to thank you for watching. We'd like to thank you for subscribing and inspiring other people to subscribe. And
Indeed, Ross. And as always, stay informed. Till next time. Bye-bye.